Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. Julie turned to face me when she reached the door. Thank you, Braden. Will we see each other tomorrow? She stood on the tips of her toes and kissed me gently on the cheek. Her scent lingered for a moment as she turned and walked out into the hallway. I watched her hips sway back and forth as she walked to the elevator. She was a beautiful young woman. There was no doubt about it. She turned and waved at me before disappearing. As soon as I slammed the door of my apartment, she started. A little young for you, don't you think? I paused, staring at the upholstery of the door, wishing for a moment that there was a mirror so I could see the expression on my own face. I was waiting, but he still didn't show up. Maybe it's finally over. Maybe I finally got off the ground. I was looking for anger, but it wasn't there. Well, she's young, Melanie. I do not know about the rest. I turned and walked past her, not bothering to look at her again. I entered my attic and headed for the kitchen, suddenly feeling the need for a drink. I opened the refrigerator to take a quick inventory. There were fruits and vegetables that I liked. A chicken breast defrosted for dinner, which I wasn't going to cook anymore. Yogurt, milk, energy drinks, and beer. I grabbed just one of the 7 bottles left over from the crate I bought almost a month ago. It was a far cry from the pace I set in the first year after the divorce. I heard her following me. The click of her heels was the exact opposite of my bare feet. I opened the bottle and placed it on a small stainless steel countertop. I opened the closet door to put the bottle cap in the trash, exactly where it was supposed to go. Everything was in its place. As always. Order. Carefully. Clear. I walked into the living room, crossing the invisible line dividing the large open spaces. Kitchen, dining room, study, bedroom, gym, living room. All the furniture was of the highest class, but it could never be confused with the appropriate set. The living room was no exception. 2 hard chairs made of black leather on one side, separated by a metal end table and a crystal-based lamp. A large chocolate leather sofa was next, with a huge 60-inch LCD display and a wooden coffee table with a glass top in front of it. But most of all, I liked the convertible chair. Plush tan leather, big enough to fit my 193 centimeters. It was definitely comfortable enough to sleep in. Nothing matched, but nothing looked out of place. Every piece called to me when I bought it. Each thing had its own story. Everything was mine, so everything fit. Everyone except her. Aren't you even going to offer me a drink? It was the first time I actually stopped to look at her. She came without warning. It was the first time I saw her in 8 years. I was honest enough with myself to admit that she looked good, even beautiful. But then again, she always had looks. There were problems with her other qualities. I wouldn't want you to get the impression that your presence here is welcome. You're not my guest. If you need something, you can find it yourself. I watched her spin on her heels and head back to the kitchen. I missed that ass. After all, she was perfect. She knew it too. That's why, as at that moment, she most often wore a skirt that said, "Yes, I know what you're looking for." I let my eyes wander from her attractive bottom to her long, slender legs, to the straps around her ankles, to the 10-centimeter heels of her must-be very expensive shoes. I let my primal desires control the moment, imagining that she was bending at the waist more for my pleasure than to find what she was looking for. I was waiting for the longing to wake up in me, a reminder of the pain and mental anguish that always comes when you are forced to look at something that no longer belongs to you. What was taken away? Stolen. Lost. But instead, I felt something completely different. Pride, maybe? It was definitely more like, yes, I slept with her. She returned, finding her signature wine glass and Chardonnay. Her eyes were calm, coldly hiding her true intentions. For the first time, as far as I can remember, this realization didn't scare me. You look good, Braden. I feel good, Melanie. The chess match started, and it was nice not to defend from the very beginning. You're not even going to ask me why I'm here. Aren't you even a little bit interested? It's not that I'm not curious. A person never has too much information. Her smirk told me that she thinks we're on equal terms. I just don't care. Even in the most unexpected situation, Melanie had an amazing ability to keep a poker face. I knew this firsthand, so it was nice to see her flinch slightly, even if it only lasted a second. She turned to face my 3-meter-long wall filled with framed photos of my trip. It was a floor-to-ceiling reminder of how I got here and the lessons I learned. Bottom. That's what it's called. I've heard it talked about. But I've never felt that way. But that's where I started. Right after Melanie divorced me and ruined my life. I'm not going to lie and say that our marriage was perfect. That's not so. At first it was very difficult for us, mainly because at any given moment we didn't have more than $20 extra. Nevertheless, we were young, full of hope, impulsive and purposeful. Our marriage did not break up at the very beginning because we did not believe that such a thing was possible. After all, kindred spirits never give up on each other. So there were memories and moments like finding change in the couch so we could scrape together enough and share a fast food meal and have enough leftovers to share a cupcake on our first anniversary. Or when we made our first Christmas decorations out of paper and crayons and hung them on an artificial Christmas tree that we found in the trash behind our apartment. When Melanie laminated them before our second Christmas, I loved her even more, and even more every year when we hung them on the Christmas tree. However, even when you love someone, they can be annoying. Melanie had a habit of rearranging things. She cleaned and replaced all the dishes in the kitchen, or spices on the shelf, or everything in the closet in the hallway according to a scheme that made sense only to her. As soon as I got used to the new configuration, she did it again. It was a small thing, and it would have been fine if it hadn't been for the fact that when she finished, she couldn't remember where everything was. "Honey, where are the scissors?" "Somewhere in the drawer." "They are not where they were last week. Did you move them?" "Maybe. I can't remember. Just keep looking. They're here somewhere." I often had to go and buy replacements for missing items if I needed them urgently. Sometimes it would take weeks before everything appeared again, and we were broke, so any additional expenses were a problem. So yes, it was a little annoying. Although most of the time I never thought about the lack of funds, probably because of making love. I always got up when she was in the room. She was as insatiable as I was. If we were alone for 5 minutes, anywhere and at any time, we often found ourselves naked. I liked the note of desperation in her voice when I gave in to her. "Please, Brayden. Oh my God, you are welcome." Then, as her arched hips sank back to the ground, I looked at her exhausted body and watched her until she came to her senses. She was perfect, with a slight sheen of sweat on her gorgeous tanned skin. Her body was young and toned, soft and voluptuous, an impossible combination of femininity and attractiveness. Memories. These were important things. After the dust settled after our divorce and I put the lid back on the bottle, I had my first epiphany. Those difficult years, when we never knew where the money for renting an apartment would come from next month, showed me that together we can survive even in the worst situation. For Melanie, they were a nightmare that would never happen again, at any cost. I watched as she studied my collection. Her eyes betrayed her with a vengeance when she looked at photos of places that we always said we would visit together, in those days when our dreams were impossible but shared. She was the epitome of walking attractiveness. The glass dangled in her fingers, the wine swirling in time with the swaying of her hips. When she tilted her head to look at the photos in the top row, her shoulder-length blonde hair draped over the shoulders of a silk blouse, revealing the delicate flowing lines of her neck, the same neck that I've dreamed of strangling so many times. "I think it's true. You've really been to all these places." "Yes." She was watching me again, as if trying to anticipate my next move. Unfortunately for her, I didn't have one. "You've changed." "Oh, I doubt that's true. Actually, I know that's not true. I'm the same person I've always been. Maybe just a little bigger than me and a lot smaller than you. See, that's what I mean. You would never have said such things to me before. Life is full of things that we want to say, plan to say, dream of saying, and keep silent. We get lost in this silence or lose the person we should be. Are we pretending to be someone we are not? I spent a lot of time looking for an answer to this question. In the end, I decided that we were trying to be who we thought we were until someone showed us our reflection in the mirror and we couldn't keep up the lie anymore. Some people deal with the shocking truth better than others. Maybe, the grin returned. I knew it. So what has changed now? You can't take anything else from me. We are not connected in any way, and that means you can't hurt me anymore. She started to speak with a lump in her throat. I wanted to believe that she was moved, but I didn't believe it. Not a bit. I want you to stop this. I didn't start this. But you can stop it. I'm not sure that's true. Although even if I could, I'm not sure I would do it. You're enjoying it. Not particularly. I'm not interested in the constant reminder that the person I loved most in the world was a lying, cheating scum. I do not know why. It's not like I said something she hadn't heard before, but I could tell that this time it hurt, at least a little. Besides, I'm smarter now. Never interfere with your enemy when he makes a mistake. Sun Tzu? Napoleon. I was completely unprepared for the complete devastation that befell me during our first conflict. I wasn't ready this time either, but fortunately I wasn't alone. The rumors had started a few months earlier. People were whispering everywhere I went. The economy was in decline. Work, any job, was worth its weight in gold, and layoffs loomed on the horizon. Walking around the factory floor was unpleasant enough. Eyes followed my every move. People stopped me when they thought no one was looking and asked if I had seen the list. But it was much worse for me at home. Melanie was close to panic, asking me every day if I had heard anything. Do I still have a job? Am I sure? What was my plan? What were we going to do? I didn't have a plan. I didn't need him anyway. My boss was a good man and had my back. He looked me in the eye and told me not to worry, so I wasn't worried. And everything would be fine if he made the final decisions and other people didn't interfere. If there were any signs, I missed them. There were some possibilities. I realized this when it was too late. Our sex life has noticeably deteriorated. I thought it was stressful. I knew I wasn't in the mood like I used to be. I guess I thought it was my fault, not hers. And then Melanie found out that even before I crossed the threshold of the house, I was cut. My boss was stunned when he told me that the person with the highest performance in the team and the best quality rating had been lost from his staff. Melanie wasn't even surprised. Unfortunately, this was not my only long-term commitment that was about to be destroyed. Melanie gave me absolutely no hint that our marriage was in trouble. She easily performed all the actions of an obedient wife. Loving hugs, kisses on the cheek, so that I was full, and there was not a speck in the house. In the last few weeks, she's been much more like Susie the housewife. She never let me leave the room without telling me she loved me, probably to hide her guilt. I was served while I was waiting in line to get access to company-sponsored outplacement resources, employment of laid-off employees. When I got home, I found that the locks had been changed. The clothes were packed in boxes and lying on the driveway, and another copy of the court order was neatly placed on top. My severance pay should have been enough for several months, but I was almost immediately faced with a choice. Should I use the remaining funds to fight for divorce and custody of my daughter, or live? I chose to fight, but I just didn't have enough strength. Lawyers, psychologists, judges all came to the same conclusion. I was a mentally abusive, unfit parent. I was unemployed and did not have the means to care for a child. I was worthless. They said it in writing. Everything is according to the law. The last blow was struck when I had my last crazy idea. If I could just talk to April face to face, she would listen to me. At that time, she was 9 years old enough to tell them that she loves her dad, that she wants to see me and that we look alike. And so I stood in the dark behind the bushes, hoping to see her. I was looking at what used to be my home. It was the first time I saw them together, my wife, my daughter, and the company's vice president of operations. He was the son of the founder of my former company, a womanizer, an asshole, and probably the worst business manager ever to hold a senior position. But his old man was respected, people were devoted to him, and the only ruined life was mine. And I was nobody. That's what they all said. He was a strange-looking man, 10 years older than me, with an expanding waist, a large checkbook, and a pre-established family. I would be the first to admit that my description was biased because of my hatred. It wasn't deformed or anything like that, but all I could see was the deformity. That night I had my first drink. Not the first one in my life, but the first one I took to hide my pain. It was a long drink. It lasted a year. It could have lasted forever, but I saw it one more time. I was wandering the streets. Unkempt facial hair, unwashed clothes, and a bad smell that announced my presence long before I appeared. I was a couple of weeks away from becoming homeless, if you could call it home, my dilapidated one-room apartment, in an almost decommissioned building from the pre-war era. She was leaving one of the boutiques in the city center. Bags weighed down her hands. She was looking in her designer handbag for the keys to her luxury SUV. I think I scared her. Actually, I know I scared you. She was momentarily at a loss what to do next, protect her possessions or her body. The drunken haze that shut me out from the real world meant I wasn't threatening her. It took me too long to get to know her. The words, "Oh my God," and her hands covering her mouth in shock before she started the car and drove away, were finally registered a few minutes later. A few minutes after that, I stole a bottle of beer from the store. That's why I was looking for a bottle opener. I was too stupid to take a bottle with a screw-off lid, and Melanie was rearranging kitchen utensils again for no reason. I couldn't find the damn bottle opener. After the bottle was broken and the contents of all but one of the drawers were thrown on the floor, I found it. Melanie wasn't there. It wasn't our house. And the bottle opener was where I left it, where she was supposed to be. Everything was in its place. I stopped drinking that day and left my hometown the next day with a backpack full of everything I had and almost $50 in my name. It wasn't difficult to stop. I was not an alcoholic. I was a broken man who tried to hide in a bottle, and failed. Are all your quotes inspiring now? Not always. Not everything inspires someone. Sometimes things just remind us of where we've been. What the fuck, Braden? What does that even mean? I have no idea what this means to you, but to be honest, I'm not interested in explaining what it means to me, especially for you. That first time, I wandered for 18 months, walking, hitchhiking, and sometimes taking the bus. I worked odd jobs until I had enough money to move on. Money was tight, but my eyes were open. I set up camp wherever I found myself. There was always a place to lie down, take a shower, and eat. I pampered myself with everything that looked interesting at any second-hand bookstore I passed. I could buy a dozen books for the price of one movie, and I read it. I wrote down everything I wanted to remember, and everything I felt in an old, battered, spiral-bound notebook. It was a diary of pain and discovery. I followed the events in the world through the newspapers that others threw away. They were often outdated, but the news that filled these pages still didn't affect me. And I talked to people. Well, mostly I listened. People loved to talk, and I was a good listener. One day, I spent money on a used digital camera at a pawn shop. I took pictures to remember the places I had been, the people I had met, and much later the things that inspired me. About once a month, for $5, one of the chain pharmacy stores transferred all my photos from a memory card to a CD. A year and a half later, I settled in a small, dusty town in the center of the country. I was working at my first full-time job after the divorce in a fertilizer factory warehouse. I worked hard hauling shit during the day, and at night I retired to my rented room above the local garage to read and write. I swapped my laptop for a used computer and spent my free days at the local library, using their free internet to upload my thoughts and photos to the blog. People followed me, commented anonymously, and although I wrote as a cathartic alternative to therapy, I liked to know that people were interested in what I wanted to say. I really liked it. Melanie stopped by the only photo of my former family, a strip of photos from a kiosk at an amusement park. April was 4 years old at the time. Her ponytail was wrapped with pink ribbons, and fake diamond studs glittered in her recently pierced ears. The excessively bright flash couldn't compete with the smiles on the faces of the three subjects. Each captured this moment. The first one was surprised, the next one was stupid, and then it was a sincere laugh. I could help you get in touch with her, to help you reconnect. Oh, so you're close. Are you aware of all your daughter's recent comings and goings? I could see her trying to find information in my gaze. It must have been hard for her not to have an advantage, not to be one step ahead, to be interested in what I know or don't know. You should be proud. She turned out to be just like you. I saw the shock in her eyes from that comment. And something else. Maybe regret? She stopped to look at her too. I think she was surprised that the images didn't match her memories. Or maybe with what she was told. It's hard to say for sure because she hasn't commented on anything. I've never considered myself a writer. In a previous life, I was the head of production at a large manufacturing company, because it was my position after the 4th promotion. I started from the bottom and went up. I've never been a writer. I've never dreamed of writing. But this did not prevent the online men's magazine from including my blog in the list of the best on the internet. And that didn't stop them from suggesting that I write a column first monthly and then weekly. The money wasn't very big, but the doors were open. 2 years later, the letter from the publishing company came as a complete surprise. They wanted to see more of my work. They wanted to publish my book, which did not exist at that time. I sent them an almost incoherent collection of essays. They sent me an editor who asked me to write an introductory chapter about how my journey began. That's how I shared my story with the editor for the first time. Then nothing happened. at least for a few years. I decided it wasn't good enough. But I kept writing on my blog. The popularity of my column grew. The money was getting a little better, but I was bored. So I left again, this time to Europe. There are no hostels for 35-year-old men. There are no discounted train tickets. But I still crossed the continent as cheaply as I could. I saw something that I had only seen before in textbooks or on TV. I visited the places where history and traditions originated, and I didn't stop. From Europe, I went to the Middle East, then to India. I spent 3 months in Asia. Languages, culture, food, all this was a new experience for me. I saw what it meant to be really poor, not a shameful excuse that I cursed. The people were still the same. People everywhere loved to talk. I was 14 months into my last trip and was about to return to the States when another letter arrived, with a preview of the cover of my book. That's when everything got interesting. I flew home to a lot of agents, editors, publishers, and lawyers. Due to the growing popularity of my column, people started talking about my book. I turned this hype into a pretty significant increase from the magazine, based mainly on a confusing formula for advertising revenue. It was more than I had ever earned before, and it was more than enough for me. So I returned to my hometown to start a new life in the place where I grew up, fell in love, and missed very much. Unfortunately, my book was published with an average response. This is far from what some had hoped for. To be honest, I wasn't too surprised. My rabid blog and column subscribers probably accounted for 99% of my sales. Unfortunately, unsatisfactory sales meant that my career as an author was most likely over before it even started. Then he went on television to call my first chapter a bunch of lies. It was a local reporter from my hometown who asked the questions. Was the story in my book really true? Did he deprive me of my job, steal my wife and daughter, and spread lies about me in court? He didn't have to say anything. He should have said nothing, but he didn't. In most countries of the civilized world, this story did not even cause excitement. But in my hometown, the son of a rich businessman and the ex-wife of a writer, it was a juicy story. And either out of embarrassment or arrogance, he overdid it. He sued me for defamation and insulting my character. That was all the publishing house needed. They spent time and money reviewing my book and spent even more time and money on editing, design, production, and distribution. Therefore, when they saw an opportunity to return some of their money, they rushed to attack. They threw an army of expensive lawyers and public relations specialists at my former employer. I was watching from the sidelines. It wasn't about him or me. It was about the dispute and the free advertising that came with it. His actions caused a big stir, and my book made the bestseller lists. It's strange how life works. Some people just never learn to leave while they're ahead. Did you know that the board of directors asked him to resign? I didn't hear it. I'm generally amazed that he lasted so long. Productivity dropped by 21% after his brilliant cuts the first year, and by 18% the next. Sales dropped, morale dropped. Your husband is an asshole, he's never been good at management. It didn't surprise me that she didn't jump to his defense. She would never take a bullet for me. Why do I think you already knew? Because you're a cold, calculating, and heartless woman. It's a pity because judging by the papers I just signed for Julie, I think he's going to need that money. Was that your lawyer? She's not mine, and she's not a lawyer. She's a paralegal. She works for the firm that represents my publisher. I'm trying to tell you that it's not about me, although obviously I will benefit a lot. I think Karma is really a bitch. I could see the answering lines flashing in her eyes. There was so much she wanted to say and wished she could, and I saw that she had finally come to the conclusion that there was nothing left in her tank, that I would have an advantage in any case. I was hoping that she would give me the opportunity to use some of the phrases that I so wanted to use, but at the same time I wanted her to just walk away and leave me alone. So why are you here? It took her by surprise, but she recovered quickly. Oh, are you curious now? No, I just don't understand what you think you can achieve. I suppose he should be grateful that you love him so much that you're here trying to save the last piece of his crumbling empire. But as I said, it really doesn't depend on me. I appreciated her reaction. It was exactly what I expected. But it's not him you love, is it? And his money. Oh, what an irony. He had them, but now, ironically, he's going to have to give them to me. And you won't have anything again. What? Don't you think you can find another rich sugar daddy to make love for money? I think you underestimate yourself. You still have a hot body. You'll land on your feet. Or In your case, maybe on your back. It wasn't like that. I'm not sure I've ever laughed so hard in my life. She couldn't have imagined that everything was different, but her body language was protective and her eyes said that it was so. I was taken aback for a moment. How could she not know? Is that even possible? Oh my God, you don't know. What does that mean? I was silent for a while, quickly making mental calculations, but I couldn't find any pitfalls. After months of interrogations, testimony, and petitions to open a case, it was all part of the protocol. If she really didn't know, he should have known that she would find out. I wouldn't harm the case by telling her about something that's about to become public. You're right, it wasn't like that at all. I'm just talking out of place. Everything was innocent, right? Yes, it was almost a whisper, and I thought about asking her to repeat it, but I didn't do it. Of course, he just contacted the families of his employees to make sure that everyone was aware of the situation at the plant. I made sure that everyone was preparing for the worst-case scenario. Of course, he paid special attention to the most venerable of the group, the middle managers. We were at the greatest risk, and he felt that his personal attention was needed. She was listening intently, but I had no idea what she was thinking. That's why he invited you to lunch to warn you. Of course, nothing has been decided yet. Everything was only preliminary, and from time to time he called you to give you inside information about how the employee evaluation process was progressing. Then a few more casual dinners, a few more phone calls, and then he changed his tactics. He poured out his heart. The stress of so many lives depending on his decisions was too much. What was being offered to him to save people was so shocking. Money. This must have really shocked Melanie because her eyes were as wide as I'd ever seen them. While I was talking, I went to my desk, looking for the file I needed. When I found him, I continued my narrative. And then you sealed our fates. That was the moment when he won and I lost. The moment when your trust in me as a man, as a father, as a husband, as a breadwinner gave way to your greed. That's when you gave him your body and destroyed my whole world. I put the papers on the table. She stared at them for a while, as if they would burn her fingers if she touched them. I have never seen these lists and have always believed that their existence is a myth. But my publisher's lawyers combed through thousands of documents discovered during the disclosure process. The one she was holding wasn't that interesting, except that my name was at the top of the list of employees who should have been left. Judging by the dates, it was one of the first lists compiled, perhaps even the very first. The second one was much more interesting. Of course, the names were the same, but in the second list, there were almost incoherent entries by John Davis, checkboxes next to several names, and my name and another one crossed out with one red line, and mine was marked with one word: Melanie. Only one other name was marked that way. The lawyers couldn't believe he kept it, but then again, he was always an idiot. The third list was printed on his own letterhead marked Final, and unsurprisingly, my name was no longer on it. Her eyes darted back and forth in a mental question, to which I am sure I gave an answer that she did not believe. And now you're wondering, how does he know all this? She was looking at me with her mouth slightly open. Stunned, she didn't look her best. You'll understand that. You're stupid, but not that stupid. Do you understand what I mean? The desire for another drink was strong, so I got up from my chair and went to the kitchen. I dropped some ice cubes into a glass and inserted it into the hole of the refrigerator to fill it with filtered water. If there's one thing I've learned, it's never to give in to my desires. Decisions made after careful planning and analysis of possible consequences were more pragmatic. That, as well as the fact that being drunk in the same room with Melanie seemed to be asking for trouble. Since we're just putting everything on public display, I'm probably interested in something. Have you ever loved me? Melanie looked at the documents for about 20 minutes. After about 5 minutes, I noticed that her grip tightened and her hands were shaking. After a few minutes, her completely stoic expression returned. All this time, she didn't say a word, and I decided to break the silence. Obviously, she didn't want to answer my question because she turned her head so that she met my gaze and then quickly looked away. I would have paid closer attention to Melanie, but I just couldn't figure out why she was sitting in my attic. I definitely had questions and I wanted answers to them, but I couldn't get to them because her sudden appearance didn't make any sense. Less than 48 hours have passed since Mr. Manapant's lawyers demanded a dispute resolution conference. My lawyer and my publisher's lawyer held an impromptu celebration that evening, regarding this step as an admission of defeat. But in a world ruled by sharks, these guys were killer whales. They didn't shy away from the fight. They wanted her, searched for her, and did everything possible to find her. Winning wasn't enough. They liked to humiliate people. I'm sure none of them have read my book. Everything I wrote was against everything they stood for. Nevertheless, it was nice to have them around. Being on the other side of the table with only righteousness on your side and being defeated was not the most fun experience. So yes, I could easily and correctly be called a hypocrite. But I didn't start down this path, so I was happy to follow it. I was lost in these thoughts when I looked at Melanie again. She was as beautiful a woman as ever. I smiled at the thought that I had been right all along. I often told her that as she gets older, she will only become more attractive. To be honest, I had no idea why she dressed up like that for me. She looked like she was ready for a night on the town, or rather a night on the lookout, and then it hit me. Oh shit! He sent you here! I'm not sure I've ever seen Melanie so angry. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen her angry at all. When we were married, even during our worst fights, she never got mad. Disappointed? Sure. Annoyed? Definitely. Scared? More than I could have guessed. This was the main reason why her betrayal was so devastating. In an ocean of incredible outcomes, as wave after wave crashes against the shore, in my mind, Melanie, who abandoned me, would be a continent away. Even now, after years of introspection and disciplined and consistent rebuilding of my self-confidence, I knew I would never be the same. Kindred spirits never give up on each other. But mine gave up. Of course, he must have been desperate. Lawsuits and attorney's fees totaled $12 million. He was rich, that's for sure, but he wasn't that rich. The Sharks believed that, in the end, the judge would award him almost $7 million. One day, they tried to explain their calculations to me. My book was called Property and had an appraisal, and his claim was frivolous and unfounded, and they gathered a mountain of evidence to prove that he and his lawyer knew about it. It all sounded like the winner would be the one who spewed out more truthful nonsense. However, his mistake won't leave him penniless, but it will be damn close. And without a source of income, like on a silver platter, without the lavish job he got earlier, such an outcome would have been disastrous. It was the only thing that made sense. He sent her to stop me, in a last-ditch attempt to save the only thing that really mattered to him. Money. He needed a wife and family. Melanie looked up but didn't answer. I knew for sure that she had no idea what I was talking about. I should have admired his ability to keep her in the dark. I could never hide even the smallest secret from her, mostly because guilt would eat me alive. Apparently, conscience was not one of John Davis's concerns. Several members of the board of directors started asking him questions. Why doesn't he have a family? When is he going to stop? The long list of women and parties. It wasn't that they didn't care about him or the women, but it could be a problem for the company. You cannot allow your next CEO to be involved in a sex scandal. It's bad for business. He just asked Stephanie Carmichael to marry him for money. Of course, she made love to him for money, so he probably thought she would just agree. Stephanie was what most people would call a woman of easy virtue, or at least that was the rumor around the factory, and her husband David was what I called an ass. I've never known about their exploits firsthand, but I've heard the stories. Most of the time, rumors are just rumors, but in their case, I always believed that they could be true. Stephanie Carmichael has always been a woman showing off too much skin, putting on an outfit that was a little inappropriate, and saying something that could easily mean something much, much different. Her husband was always the guy who talked about what an attractive piece of ass his wife had, and tried to get guys to admit that they were staring at her. I always thought she looked really good for a former daytime stripper. Of course, the contents of her resume could also be just rumors. However, what would have been a ridiculous story about any other person actually seemed plausible to them. Making love for one night, wild house parties, photos and videos on the internet. I had no idea if any of this was true. But what I knew for sure was that David Carmichael's name was another name crossed off the infamous list, and Stephanie's name was written next to it. And David mysteriously disappeared right after he was fired. Besides, although I always thought she was a very stupid bleached blonde, she obviously wasn't as stupid as she often looked. She has the gift tax records to prove it. In 3 years, he gave her almost $150,000 for treatments twice a week. Stevie, as she seemed to prefer to call herself, blabbed all about Davis's little seduction scheme. She also made no secret that she made love to him for money. We had an agreement. He was generous with gifts, and I showed him my appreciation as best I could every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon at the apartment he rented for me. My husband and I appreciated his gifts, but as soon as my Davy graduated from nursing school and returned home, I abandoned this fat bastard and his little organ. She also, no problem, gave a very convincing explanation for why he still picked up a little bit on the side for many years after marrying Melanie. I looked directly at Melanie as I was finishing my next sentence. Obviously, he was looking for something he couldn't get at home. I wasn't sure if Stephanie was telling the truth until I saw Melanie's look. Then I was convinced of it. Of course, she can make it up, because it definitely doesn't look like the woman I was married to. I could tell she was about to lose her temper. It's been almost an hour since she even made a sound. I decided that if I ever get my pound of flesh, it should happen soon. So what did he tell you when he sent you here? He told me to force you to stop the lawsuits by any means. Does he pimp you often, or only when he's going to lose his fortune? He's not my pimp. He's my husband. Hey, don't judge me harshly. I know firsthand what your tight little body can do to a man. It makes you believe in something that really just can't be true. So when do we move on to the by any means part of the show? Because to be honest, this part of convincing arguments has become a little tedious. And what is needed for this? She said it with such a lack of conviction. It was the only time I allowed myself to feel the slightest bit sorry for her. It was just beyond my comprehension. How could someone so handsome, so full of life, so energetic, have such a lack of self-confidence? How could this man allow himself to be used in such a way? For the money? To be honest, I at least understood this attraction a little bit. My favorite chair, it cost me more than $1,000. When we furnished our first apartment, I'm not sure Melanie and I spent the same amount on everything we had. So yes, it was extravagant. But at the same time, it was damn convenient. Nevertheless, I had no doubt that I would trade all my extravagances for another day alone with Melanie in our small and shabby first apartment. So that everything would be as it was, I think it just made us different people. As I said before, even if I could stop it, I wouldn't. I think you should go home to your husband and tell him that I'm not even interested in his proposal. Go back to him with your depraved ass. Meet and talk about how you're going to get through this difficult period in your life. I'm sure you can handle a love as strong as yours. I was looking at her. I was looking at her perfect lips that I wanted to kiss and bite. I watched her beautiful silk blouse detach slightly from her stunning cleavage, showing only traces of her very thin and probably equally expensive underwear. It took all my willpower not to rip the buttons off her body, sending them flying, to take another look at her incredibly curvy. But I didn't do it. After all, kindred spirits never give up on each other. I was waiting for tears, but they never came. Of course, water was accumulating in her eyes, and I thought that for a moment she might let it spill. But she didn't do it. I had to give her credit, at least for that. Get out of my house, and never bring your ass back. Our conversation lasted a couple of hours, but I didn't plan to satisfy her. To be honest, I didn't think about it at all. There were too many other thoughts in my head. The weeks leading up to that night were full of surprises. But she was beautiful, and I was a man, and she proposed. What should a girl do to get a supplement? I took her glass and went to the kitchen. I filled it with the wine of her choice and returned with her glass and bottle. I read your book twice. I would have responded with a witty comment or sincere gratitude if I hadn't been mesmerized by what was in front of me. I would have had a better chance of finding words if I hadn't been wondering what happened to her blouse and feeling sorry for myself because I hadn't noticed her disappearance. Fortunately, I could watch her take off her skirt. And I couldn't help but wonder what all these adventures, all this self-discovery, all this, she continued, standing in her almost transparent black bra and matching but surprisingly small panties. My thoughts were directed at the purely decorative quality of her underwear, because although her breasts seemed much larger than necessary for her small figure, she stood firmly and high on her own, receiving absolutely no support from the fragile, transparent material. This fact was confirmed a few moments later when she reached one hand behind her back and with a practiced movement undid the clasp of her bra, which allowed it to fall to the floor. I was amazed when her breasts didn't move at all. Research. It will help you to be a better lover. I've been told that I'm quite impressive. I stood firm until she turned around, ran her hands over the back of her long, slender legs, and carefully undid the straps on her heels. When she got out of her shoes, her thong disappeared into the slit of her ass, and I wouldn't have believed they were there if I hadn't seen them from the front. But you'll forgive me if I don't want to take your word for it. My organ attracted attention, painfully struggling to get out of my jeans. I walked behind her, pushing her hips forward against the wall at the far end of the room. My hands reached out to cup her breasts, and her hands followed mine. My lips and teeth nibbled at the base of her neck, earlobes, and shoulder. My attack intensified with every breath she took. She raised her hands above her head, desperately searching for mine, but when we hit the wall, I grabbed them and pressed them against her with my left hand. I rested my erection on her ass, and with my other hand, I ran down from her breasts, over her elastic stomach, and caught a trace of cool moisture on the outside of her panties. I held her for a moment, letting her feel my presence from behind while my hand teased her, tickling her most intimate place in front. Her breathing was uneven, and I waited for it to calm down. And when it calmed down, I used my knee to spread her legs wider and slipped my hand under her lace and penetrated her hot, wet channel for the first time, just before whispering in her ear. We made the most passionate love possible. Julie stayed with me every night for the next 4 months while the court decisions went through the court of inquiry. We made love like newlyweds the entire time she stayed with me, although she always said that no matter how impressive the lovemaking was, she was going to return to New York as soon as the lawsuits were over. I didn't resent her at all. Small sharks with only a few hours of legal practice left don't hold on to the shallow end of the pool. Nevertheless, the time spent with her, no matter how short it was amazing. That first night we were together, she was at my apartment explaining the latest lawsuit. It was a lawsuit from my daughter, who sued me to save her inheritance. I can't say for sure that I didn't know Melanie was angry when she left last night, even in a rage. But I can say that I honestly thought she was mad at me, maybe because I refused her or stole what she rightfully earned on her back. Obviously, I was wrong. I can't imagine what it was like for him. I know I was devastated when Melanie didn't choose me, faced with such a common problem as downsizing. But again, the coroner's report was inconclusive. John Davis may never know. A few hours after she left me, drunk enough to barely keep conscious, Melanie shot him, once, right into the organ. The bullet fragments tore his femoral artery. Then she pointed the gun at herself. According to them, he bled out quickly. He most likely died right away. But no one can say for sure if he lived long enough to find out that she would rather kill herself than satisfy him when he was poor. I can't imagine what it was like. But I hope he had at least a moment to think about it. Anyway, I spent a few days getting mad at Melanie. Not for me, but for her daughter. No matter how rotten Melanie was, her daughter needed her. No, April didn't give me any indication that she and Melanie were close, rather the opposite. However, she was a lost girl the only time she came to me. She didn't remember me at all, at least not the real me. This surprised me very much. I thought she was old enough to remember. But memories can be replaced with lies if you hear them often enough. She obviously didn't believe me when I said that once, a long time ago, we were happy. Together. And they were a family. And now there's no one left to confirm it. One photograph on a wall of hundreds of photographs could not, and did not require, change her mind. She was bitter at Melanie's funeral, and I completely understood her. Unfortunately, months later, it seems that I'm still enemy number one, with little hope of changing her mind. When the decision was finally made and her inheritance was almost lost, she hurried out of the courtroom, narrowly avoiding a contempt charge for the profanity tirade she left behind. That was the last time I saw her, and I don't have much hope that I'll ever see her again. The bond that I hoped we would always have turned out to be as fragile as the one between her mother and me. But maybe fathers and daughters are different things. Maybe Mr. and Mrs. John Davis didn't completely turn her against me. And someday she will find out that she can always count on her father's help. Or maybe she'll find herself in the big world. Or he will find his soulmate, hopefully one that won't give up on her.